Good day. The first thing to say today is to wish you all of you, a very happy Christmas as we enter the holiday season, and to thank you for your support throughout 2021, which has been, for me, the first year of my channel and therefore a challenging and wonderful year. The second is to say that because we are now entering the Christmas holidays, I'm going to have to reduce my output significantly. I'm going to continue to the extent that I can to comment on particular important events, and of course in terms of international relations, in terms of geopolitics, things in the world never stand still. But I'm going to have to reduce the, shall we say, the depth of analysis that I produce, at least for the next couple of days, at least over the holiday weekend. But as I said, I will touch on those events which I consider important, and the issue I'm going to touch on briefly today is a comment made by the Russian President Vladimir Putin over the course of the mammoth press conference that he is holding today. I would just remind my viewers, all of you, that of course the Russians do not celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, as most people around the world do. The Russian Orthodox Christmas is celebrated later in the year on the 7th of January. The main Russian holiday at this time of year, anyway, is the New Year holiday, though the Russians do celebrate Christmas as well. But it means that the Russians are operating to a different clock, and for the moment, Moscow, at least political Moscow, the government and its institutions, remain as busy and as active as always. I expect, by the way, that this particular year, especially, Russia will remain, at least the political leadership in Russia, will remain active through the Christmas and New Year holiday as well, even when it starts in Russia. Anyway, Putin gave this enormous press conference, which he regularly does. He was, as he always, very much in charge of his brief. He was, as always, somebody who discussed both economic and domestic issues as well as foreign policy. And I should say on the economy, which is obviously an issue that comes up regularly in these discussions, in these press conferences, he gave me the impression of being in a relatively optimistic mood. No sign there of any worry that sanctions are going to derail things or are going to make things difficult. But he also, of course, discussed extensively international relations, foreign policy, the conflicts between Russia and the West. He had many critical things to say about Western policy. He made it absolutely clear that the Russians are absolutely serious about the security guarantees they're looking for from the West, that the treaties, the draft treaties that the Russians have proposed to the West are for real. And of course, he made it absolutely clear that the Russian position on Ukraine is unyielding. The Ukrainian issue has to be resolved as a result of direct negotiations between Ukraine and the breakaway republics of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as required by the Minsk Agreement, and Russia is not prepared to retreat from that position. But as I've also discussed recently in various other programs, one of the reasons why the Russians feel able to take this extremely strong line on international questions, on the situation in Europe, on the situation in Ukraine, on NATO's eastward expansion, on their red lines. One of the reasons they feel able to do this is firstly because their army is much more powerful than it was, their economy is more resilient than it was, but one of those reasons is their friendship with China and the fact that they now feel that far from being isolated, they have a country which they expect will be the world's biggest economy. Putin made that very same point in his press conference. The world's biggest economy, that they have that most powerful country on their side in this confrontation they find themselves in with the West. And over the course of this press conference, Putin said something which, to my mind, highlights how close the friendship, the de facto alliance in all but name, between China and Russia has become. And these were the words, and I'm taking this quotation from Russia's official news agency TASS, and these were Putin's words. "We cooperate with China in the security area. China's armed forces are equipped with the most advanced weapon systems to a large extent. We are even developing together certain high-tech types of weapons. We are working in space, aircraft areas, on planes and helicopters." Well, I've discussed frequently in many programs my belief that there is technology exchange and technology cooperation, especially in the military sphere, between China and Russia. Vladimir Putin has now confirmed it. It's not one-off projects like the early warning radar system, which he revealed some years ago the Russians are helping the Chinese to develop. It turns out that the Russians and the Chinese are in joint development of certain high-tech types of weapons. And he said what they were, or at least he gave some general ideas. It's in space, in aircraft areas, on planes and helicopters. So it's primarily aerospace. Now, what sort of projects do the Russians and the Chinese might they be working with together? Well, a few weeks ago, when there was a lot of excitement about a Chinese hypersonic glide vehicle test, I suggested that the Russians might have passed on some of the technology they've used to develop their own hypersonic glide vehicle, the Avant-Garde. And the Chinese clearly have some kind of space shuttle program, a civilian space shuttle program. And of course, the Russians developed and tested their own space shuttle, the Duran, in the 1980s. So they have quite a lot of technology and expertise in this field, and it's quite likely, it's possible, that they've passed on that technology as well. And we know that the Russians are working with the Chinese on developing a new heavy lift helicopter. And of course, Putin has also referred to aircraft areas. And that's perhaps a little bit more interesting and rather more surprising, because if we're talking about fifth generation aircraft, fighter jets, the Russians and the Chinese have each developed their own fifth generation fighter jet, the J-20 in the case of the Chinese, the Sukhoi 57 in the case of the Russians. And these two aircraft are actually radically different from each other in many respects. They're both stealthy. They both can achieve supersonic supercruise. But the Russian fighter jet, the Sukhoi 57, seems to be primarily focused on high speed and maneuver, which the Chinese aircraft, the J-20, perhaps is more oriented towards long range. But anyway, that's an impression. We can't be certain, but certainly the two aircraft don't look very similar with each other. So one does wonder what sort of aircraft areas the Chinese and the Russians might be working on together at high tech, at the high tech level. And I wonder whether possibly I mean, this is just a possibility. It might be long-range strategic bombers. Both the Chinese and the Russians are known to have bomber projects, long-range bomber projects, subsonic stealth bombers. And I have to say, the very sparse information we've had about both of these projects actually suggests that they're quite similar. Might not be identical, but it seems to me plausible that the Chinese and the Russians might be exchanging ideas and working together on solutions to bring these rather similar bomber projects to fruition. And of course, helicopters, well, the heavy lift helicopter that I spoke about is apparently a civilian project, or primarily a civilian project. Perhaps there's other things on the horizon. The Russians have very advanced and effective helicopter gunships, the Mi-28, the Kamov-52. Chinese perhaps less so. So perhaps there's some sort of project underway to develop some more advanced, perhaps ultra-high-speed helicopter gunship of the future, and perhaps the Chinese and the Russians are working together in this field. Regardless, perhaps the most important thing that comes out of this is that the fact that the Russians and the Chinese are in joint development of weapon systems, high-tech weapon systems, is unprecedented for the Russians since the start of the Soviet era. The Soviets, since the 1930s, and the Russians thereafter, have basically focused on developing all their high-tech weapons by themselves. They've never really involved themselves in collaboration with other countries, certainly not at the end of in the field of high-tech developments. The fact that they're prepared to do that with the Chinese indicates a very high level of trust with the Chinese. And though the Chinese have in the past worked with the Russians, they've used Soviet and Russian technologies in the past to develop their own military-industrial complex, one gets the sense that they've now evolved to the point where the Russians see them as a partner. So this is, quite a major step for both countries, but especially perhaps for Russia. And it points back to the key point that I've said before. It highlights the extent to which Russia and China are now not just allies, but as they like to say, more than allies. I mean, the United States, for example, does not usually enter into high-end technology partnerships of this kind, even with its own allies. So, I think that Putin made this comment partly in order to signal to the United States and to the West that the Russians have the Chinese behind them. But of course, it's also a message to the West as it confronts China as well, that of course, if the US comes up against China, for example, over Taiwan, it must be prepared to face a China that is now getting cutting-edge technology in aerospace products, and I'm guessing in other products too, through its technological exchange with the Russians. So we see how this military political better than alliance, strategic partnership between China and Russia is crystallizing. And though I'm sure that the US has for a long time suspected that this kind of collaboration is going on, I strongly suspect that Putin's disclosure today of the extent of that collaboration in developing high-tech weapons is going to ring alarm bells in Washington, especially in the Pentagon. Now, this is, of course, only one aspect of the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership. The Russians and the Chinese are now talking about unifying or consolidating or merging their financial systems, creating their own financial architecture distinct from that of the West in order to make their countries more resilient with each other. They're setting up their own credit ratings agencies. They already have their own debit and credit cards, payment cards. They have their alternatives to SWIFT up and running. They're also, of course, engaging in ever deeper industrial collaboration with each other. And what we see is that at the top of the system, in the very important areas of high-tech development, high-tech weapons development, they're collaborating as well. And they're also working in space. Is there any relationship between two great powers that has been as close? Well, I think you have to go back to the Second World War, to the relationship between Britain and the United States at that time, to find a collaboration that was as intense as this. But I suspect that this collaboration is more intense still. That collaboration between Britain and the United States during the Second World War gained decisive form in the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, which led to the creation of the world financial system as we know it. It led to the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It established the position of the dollar, at that time still connected to gold, as the world's reserve currency. And of course, this industrial and military cooperation, which also had an intelligence aspect, was instrumental in establishing the power of the Western Alliance, that collaboration that took place between Britain and the United States in the 1940s. Of course, at that time, the United States was the rising power, Britain was the declining power. I think the reality today is that China certainly is still a rising power. I think, contrary to what many people in the West say, Russia is a rising power also. And it seems to me that China and Russia potentially are a more formidable cooperation, more formidable team today than the United States and Britain were in the 1940s and 1950s, in a situation where the United States very quickly emerged as the overwhelmingly dominant partner in that relationship. But the key point is that teaming up of Britain and the United States in the 1940s shaped the world as we know it today. Will this teaming up of China and Russia shape the world of the future? Well, we'll have to see. But clearly, big moves are taking place, and Putin has lifted the curtain ever so slightly and given us a glimpse, and we can get a sense of what is now going on. Well, thank you for joining me today. As I said, less from me over Christmas. Enjoy your Christmas. I will, as I said, post more content when I can, highlighting those topics that are of interest. But in the meantime, remember to check us out on Locals, our other main platform. Also our various other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, SuperU, and the rest. Remember also, if you wish to support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, our shop is still open. If you want to buy Christmas gifts, well, you could get yourself a nice good day mug. Remember also, if you like these videos, to tick the like button, and if you like my channel, to support my channel by checking your subscription as well. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me, as I said, soon, and have a very happy Christmas in the meantime.